Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining the panel Investigations with Mapping and Satellite Imagery. My name is Marina Walker Guevara, and I am Executive Editor at the Pulitzer Center. The Global Investigative Journalism Conference is my favorite conference. It is my favorite conference because of the community, and that's all of you, and also because of the incredible collaborations that often start in this conference. So please don't miss those networking sessions, even if they are virtual this year. In this panel, you will hear from three amazing journalists who use satellite imagery, mapping, and other digital tools to defy censorship, expose wrongdoing, and make visible what powerful people and institutions wanted hidden, out of sight. Their stories challenge false narratives, won awards, including a Pulitzer Prize, and showed us novel approaches to reporting and to storytelling when field reporting is restricted. So we hope that this panel will equip you with a few new strategies, tools, approaches that will help you do your really important work effectively, even in the face of censorship and other challenges. So this is how it's going to work today. I will now introduce our panelists briefly. They will do short presentations, and then we will have a conversation. First, I will ask a few questions, and then we will turn it over to you. So please get your questions coming as you think of them, as you hear the presentations. Write them in the chat. The Q&A is going to happen in the chat. So without further ado, I am going to introduce the first panelist is Alison Killing. She is a licensed architect and geospatial analyst who uses maps and data to investigate urgent social issues. Alison and two of her colleagues at BuzzFeed News won the 2021 Pulitzer Prize in International Reporting with their project Built to Last, which she will discuss today. John Eromosele is a civic technologist and project manager for Code for Africa, where he has trained journalists, university students, and citizens on open data, tools, and other resources. And last but not least, of course, is Laura Kurtzberg. Is an assistant professor at Florida International University and the data visualization lead for Ambiental Media, where she has worked on projects to map and visualize the Amazon rainforest. And Laura, I am going to turn it over to you now, so you can tell us how you have used your geospatial analysis to tackle important environmental stories.
Great, thank you so much for that introduction. I'm going to be talking a little bit about a project that I did with Ambiental Media called Smoke Screen. And my information is on the slide right now. So if anybody has a desire to reach out, please feel free to email me at that email that you can see on the slide. So a little note about Ambiental Media. We are basically a collaborative, independent journalism outlet that's really focused on spreading science and different stories in Brazil and in South America. A lot of our stories have dealt with environmental issues that happen in the Amazon rainforest, but we're interested in all sorts of environmental science stories, and we're always working with data and maps for those stories. So definitely check out ambiental.media if you're interested in this kind of thing. The Smokescreen project in particular was supported by the Pulitzer Center's Rainforest Journalism Fund, and it dealt with the interconnected world of forest fires and deforestation in the Amazon. The reason why we started working on this project really stemmed from a quite dramatic year in 2019, which many of you may have heard about, where the amount of forest fires in the Amazon that were happening were making international news. This phenomenon of a burst and increase in forest fires happens every year. But in 2019, we saw some really striking images. For example, you can see here a post on Twitter of the city of Sao Paulo in Brazil, completely shrouded in smoke from the fires. which were many, many, kilometers away, in the middle of the day, making it look like it was nighttime, right? And you can also see here some mapping from NASA detecting the carbon monoxide from those forest fires in August 2019. So a lot of people had their eyes on the Amazon rainforest and their eyes on Brazil's reaction to this really pressing environmental issue. And at the same time, the government in Brazil and many official sources were disputing what was happening and what, the international community was looking at. So we saw a lot of headlines like the ones that you can see on the slide right now, where Brazil's president was calling the Amazon fires a lie on one day, and then the next day saying, well, they are happening, but it's because of NGOs or it's because of indigenous communities. So really, it was quite the blame game. And there was a lot of false government narrative happening in many different directions. So what we did was we wanted to partner with scientists to dispel the false narrative that was happening and to expose the truth. There's no sound here, but I'm just going to show, for example, this was a video that we produced in partnership with Mongabe, where we actually had the scientists themselves speaking about their research and just explaining in easy to understand terms what was happening in this, everything surrounding the fires. As journalists, we also directly partnered with the Sem Flama, or the No Flame Project, which was a partnership of many different scientists and people from the Amazon Environmental Research Institute to try and work with community members to come up with alternative ways of traditional agriculture that didn't require burning in between different cycles of planting. So we were partnering with scientists, we were partnering with community members in the Amazon, and we were working with the data all at the same time. More specifically, we used data that actually came from official Brazilian government sources. So there's actually a lot of really excellent open data available about forest fires, about deforestation. And we also used one data set called the Rural Environmental Registry, which is a database of properties that are owned by private owners in the Amazon. So the results of what we found from all that collaboration and from the data analysis itself was that the 4 municipalities in Brazil that topped the list for deforestation, that had the most deforestation in 2019, also had the most forest fires. And you can see which they are right now on the slide. Within that period of time, in those municipalities, 72% of fires were on medium to large private properties. And the pattern continued when we repeated the analysis for the 2020 year period. So what this means is that it's very clear that fires are closely tied to deforestation. That deforestation and that fire is being undertaken by private landowners with large swaths of land, not the traditional communities or the NGOs as was being, suggested by the government. And not only that, but this pattern continues and worsens. It wasn't just the one time in 2019 when we saw those viral photos. It continues to happen, and we were able to prove that with our analysis. We published the entire methodology on Medium as a blog post. So there's a lot more detail into, how I specifically use tools like QGIS and Mapbox to create the maps and to conduct the analysis. So if you're interested in that, definitely check out this blog post. And that's it. That's what I have to say today about smoke screen.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was incredible. And I'm sure everyone has lots of questions coming up for you. But now we're going to turn it over to John, who will give us the behind the scenes of another groundbreaking project, in this case, the Makoko project.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm happy to share with you today our experiences and our projects on Map Makoko. So let me just share my screen. Let me know when you can see my screen, please. Okay, cool. So we're going to talk about a project I am personally passionate about, and as a result, my organization is actually championing this project, not just because it's like any other project, but because of the impact around this project. So hello everyone, my name is Mosele John. I'm a civic technologist, and my details are on the screen. We would share the presentation with you likely. So because of time, we have a lot of things to cover. I would just go take a deep dive into the business for the day. So Code for Africa is actually the organization championing this Map Makoko project, and we're able to pool resources and partnerships together to ensure we successfully made the Map Makoko project a reality. Okay, so these are some of our partners that we partner with on our day-to-day activities. So this is just a little table of content of what we'll be covering today. We'll be looking at the project on its own. We would look at how we did the project, why we did the project, and some tips on how you can also replicate this project across other places, other countries, because our products and our programs are actually replicable in Code for Africa. Okay, so Map Makoko, it's actually a mapping project, but it's actually a project that is touching lives from the slum communities. So there's a little video here about it, but I think I will let that slide pass, though it's just a 2-minute video about, well, let me just play the video a bit to give you an insight to whet your appetite about the kind of community we're talking about. We're going around with a team made up of girls from Makoko to actually collect points of interest within their neighborhood, within their houses, to put this on the map so we can have multi-layers of points of interest on this map. So we can see the streets and have easy navigation, and all of this can be on the map for free.
Having fun, like mapping our community, giving the areas that do not have names, we are giving them like address.
Now, city they go to the I just get the middle number 19, number 13, number 14. Number more, do you know? Who do I need 3 big legacy? As a go to the Miwa Castle, city balance city. Oh, as a go city, a ton of banga, a balobia bonimosi.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So that's just a brief on what happened over the community, how the community looks like. So what we did was actually, we went to Makoko and saw how we can solve some of their problems. Makoko on itself, as you saw from the map, from the video, it's actually a floating slum, one of Africa's largest floating slum. And what happens is they actually built their houses on sticks and silts on the water. So that means they are vulnerable. to the rising tides, to a lot of climate change and global warming that is hitting the earth right now. All right. So, but the community is hosting over 300,000 residents, and these residents are very active politically and otherwise. You know, that is a whole lot of a labor force for any country that is sitting there, you know, without proper recognition. So we go over to why did we map Makoko? In the first place, when we looked at Makoko, Makoko was not in any official map. It was just represented by a dot. And, you know, that meant a lot to us because that's a lot of data gap. All right. And when we interface with the community, we have to discover that there's actually a gap. So there are lots of middlemen that comes to stand between them and people that want to actually support the community, and a whole lot of development and innovations that are supposed to come. And you agree with me that for innovation, primary data, it's key. So there was no primary data available, and we said all of these your problems can be solved, but not by us. But what we could do was to provide the primary data. That's the foundation. That's the fountain. And we can point fingers to a lot of impacts that have been actually happening since after that. So this is a before and after slide, and we'll also show you how we did something like that. So this is me and one of the journalists. We did a lot of engagements and a lot of strategic partnerships when we wanted to start this project. We looked at it and said, okay, how can we achieve this? The budgeting, the resources, the technical know-how that we need to do this because of its unique location. So what we did was to leverage on strategic partnership. We partnered with we were sponsored by the Police Center on crisis reporting, and we also partner with the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap, and those brought some of the funding. All right, Code for Africa also brought a lot of support, staff strength, and a lot of support for the project. Then we looked at it and said, to achieve this, we need other partnerships at other levels. So we had to partner with the American Corner, an organization that helped us also we had to use their space for the venue. They provided some tech support like gadgets for trainings and all of that. Then we partnered with the Makoko Dream, a local NGO there that is supporting the community with education. So we had to partner with them to be able to get the buy-in of the community. So community engagement was key, because you need to take the community along in any project you're working on. So any community-based project, it has to be people-centric, all right? If not, you will definitely hit a brick wall at some point, right? Then that got them involved. They understood the project. You saw from that video where the king of the community, one of the Bale, as it's settling called at Makoko, was describing to you the project we are working on. So that makes you understand that he already has an in-depth knowledge on what we are doing and how we are going to achieve that. So we said, okay, in achieving this, we couldn't just do this on our own. We want to empower them, not just parachute into communities, pull a stunt, a good work, and just disappear. So, and you agree with me that mapping is a continuous process. So we had to go in, we trained them, we built the capacity of about 32 persons, about 17 females, and we trained them in class and also on site. So it was a classroom training where we brought some drones on the table, and we also made that drone fly. So we taught them how those drones could fly and how they can use it to collect data about their own community. From the video, you can also see where Abigail, one of the volunteers, was telling you that they are happy mapping their community. So we didn't just come to do it for them. We brought the technical know-how and taught them how to do it. So that is the fun of the project, of community-based projects. You're in the community, you synchronize with them, you blend with them, you make them feel your presence, and you leave them with knowledge to continue doing what you came to teach them how to do. Then we deployed drones, of course, because of the terrain. And we also had a ground team. So we mapped with drones and canoe. So the ground team, we used a tool called Open Data Kit. I have a tool list, don't worry, you'll get them. So the Open Data Kit was customized with our data standards on what we want to collect. And so we went to collect some points of interest, like boat terminals, schools, some clinics, points of water points, drinking water points, and some small, medium, and small, medium, and large enterprises within the community. So you can find your way and navigate around Makoko even without the help of a traditional guide. All right, so some useful tips. When you're having your projects or your programs like this, you have to be solution driven from the beginning. So what solution are you preferring? So we came to prefer a solution of data gap. Primary data was not there, and now there is a primary map data of Makoko. Now, we also gave them visibility. We made them to be seen by the international community, even by the government, by every other stakeholder. All right. Then we also actively involved the locals. It was the locals that were flying the drones. It was the locals that did the mapping. They engaged with the software. All right. So, and they also saw the output. So then we got challenges, of course. It was not like a flawless project that without some brick walls, but we worked around it. Many journalists today would hit a brick wall in their project and they would just let that project lie. All right. Even when it comes to funding, for instance, you can ask your funder, can I get another donor to co-fund? You know, there are always alternative and options. Don't fail to always come to the negotiation table or to the drawing table, as it were. Okay, so there are issues of privacies or different kinds of or technical skill gap. You can partner. We partnered with African Drones, Uhuru Lab, so we can get, even if it's not a free service, for instance, you can get a subsidized rate. So that could also cushion the effect on your budget. All right, so these are some walls you can walk around. We liaised with government, like we used one of these primary schools, their open field to do a general field tests for our drones. So we partnered with the government, went to the Ministry of Education, wrote a letter to them and got their permission to use their fields. In turn, involved some students also to be part of the project, to also learn how to fly drones. And they were happy doing that in their own primary school, all right? And so their school was also part of the entire map that it's in the project, okay? Then being impact driven from the beginning will enable you to look for this impact even after the project, and will help you put some triggers that will generate this impact. And that was why we also brought in data journalism. All right, we have to bring in data journalism to help us amplify the project. Many journalists, when they finish releasing their story, they leave it out there. They don't market it. They don't promote it. That's a part that makes story just lie down there, don't get to the target audience. So if you want decision makers to actually come across your story, you need to amplify it. And partnerships can also help you amplify it. Setting up social media campaigns can help you amplify it. Working with newsrooms and news agencies can also help you. I think I also thank the African and France Press, the AFP media. They also helped us a lot. We partnered, they helped us do that documentary you saw, okay? And it actually went viral. So we talking about spatial data, we used spatial data, and when we talk about spatial data, you have vector, you have raster. Just because of time, I'll just give you a quick overview. For shapefiles, there are lots of shapefiles in different formats, as you can see on the screen. For raster, we have the .tif, we have the JPEG, and we actually use the .tif as well on open area map. Take notes, if you're having a drone coverage, and after you've taken the drone footage, you stitch all the images together. If you want to export it to OpenStreetMap, particularly, for instance, you need to send it to Open Area Map. That's a platform that will enable you export it easily to any IDE or to your Java OpenStreetMap platform where you can edit. Okay. So because of time, I will not go into all of these details. They're on the slides, you're going to get them. So let me these are just examples of a raster map. This is an example of a vector point. This is Makoko itself. When we've added some of the points of interest, as you can see on the screen. This is an example of a vector polygon. You can use them for choropleth maps, and tools like Flourish, Infogram, Flourish Data Wrapper can help you do this seamlessly within minutes. Okay, So this is an example of a point data map. I'm just showing you these levels so you can see them. So now let's take a deep dive into data visualization and mapping and satellite imagery. So when we talk about mapping or geojournalism, you can actually do this with some cool tools. Google Earth is there for you, Google Earth Pro. You can zoom in and take screenshots and add that to your stories to start with. Okay, now I mentioned open area map. This is how it looks like. And you can have this, if you click this link up here, the drone imagery of the Makoko itself that was used, the raw file is there. It's open and it's there. And one of the impacts I'll just also throw to you because I didn't put that on a slide on its own. We have people reaching out, assessing these imageries, assessing the data from this project, and they're already working with it. And the good news is soon you'll be getting a course on this on an online MOOC where you can assess all of these about the project, as the project is a case study on the geojournalism course. Okay, both continent-wide and even in Europe. We have been getting contacts reaching out to us to use some of this data to teach their students like a case study. And outside that, there was a follow-up project to continuous project of the map Makoko. So after finding all of these water points and all of these boat terminals and all these points of interest, we now took we took an angle which was drinking water. And so we had to do a project like an extension of it to see how their drinking water quality is. So we did a scientific analysis on the water quality. So we partnered with the Red Cross Society and we went there to the community. We took samples of water from these various spots. And we then finally, I guess my time is up. We finally, yeah.
Yes.
So, okay. I just round up. So we took these points and this water, we analyzed them and also got the quality of water they're drinking there. So to advise them better on what to do. So this is a satellite imagery, and you can get this from Google Earth. You can also get satellite imagery from Mapillary. So we used a Flourish slider. Flourish is a data visualization tool that you can use. It's free. If you click here, you'll get it. You can create an account. And for newsrooms can get free accounts for Flourish. So there's an application you do. If you just click this link here, you can apply and get it for free. Okay, so the tools we used Open Data Kit, drone spreadsheets, Java OpenStreetMap, then the humanitarian task manager, Flourish, and I added data journalism here because it's actually a tool that helped us to tell the world what we did and how we did that. So to learn more on data journalism, you can go to courses.academy.africa, and the link is on the slide, and you see a course on geojournalism. You can take that. As more courses come on these, we would also share. So these meet the partners of Map Makoko project. It was being championed by Code for Africa, sponsored by Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting, and also sponsored by the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap. Then all other partners below here contributed to ensuring the project became a success. So thank you all. I will take questions as they come in.
Thank you so much, John. You can now stop sharing your screen. Thank you for all these incredibly valuable lessons from this amazing project. It's a good moment to remind the audience that we are putting together a tip sheet with tools and resources, so you don't need to furiously take notes. You will get a document with all of these resources. And now I'm going to turn it over to Alison so she can talk about Build to Last, another incredible investigation.
Cool, thanks so much, Marina. So for the past 3 years, I've been working to locate and then to analyze this secret network of detention camps in Xinjiang in China. So let me just share my screen. So Xinjiang is in northwest China. It's a really large area. It's about 4 times the size of Alaska, and it's home to about 25 million people. 15 million of those are Turkic Muslims. So they include the Uyghur, but also a lot of Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, Tajiks, Shibi and Hui Muslims, amongst others. Now, since Xinjiang became part of the People's Republic of China, there's been a lot of oppression of these groups and intermittent crackdowns on the practice of Islam. Since, well, over the past few years, those crackdowns have intensified. In sort of from around 2013, 2014 onwards, there were moves to install a huge amount of surveillance infrastructure across the region, from CCTV cameras, which can be seen throughout this image, but also police stations and checkpoints every few meters through urban areas, software installed on people's phones to monitor their online activity. And since 2016, there's also been a move to a mass detention campaign in which it's estimated over 1 million people have been caught up. This image shows 2 camps in Artush area, which have both been built since 2016. Now, when I started this work in 2018, it was believed that there were 1,200 camps in existence, and yeah, as I said, 1 million people minimum detained in them. And at the same time, only 70 of them had been found. And so our team wanted to try and find the full network. We had quite a diverse team. I have an architecture and urban planning background. Megha Rajagopalan, who is a journalist and has worked in China extensively over the past few years. She worked first for Reuters and then for BuzzFeed News, and she was the first journalist to manage to visit one of these camps. And then finally, Christo Bushek, who is a developer with extensive human rights experience, who has done a lot of work to collate databases which describe human rights abuses, bringing together video and social media. And he also builds the tools to help people like me and Megha to analyze and make sense of those databases. So quite early on, we decided that we wanted to use satellite imagery to look at this problem. And there were a couple of reasons for that. The first is, as I mentioned, the scale of Xinjiang. It's absolutely huge, and it's very sparsely populated. And that would have made it very, very difficult to cover the region on the ground and to try and uncover this full network. The other issue, though, was access. It's very difficult to work effectively in Xinjiang because of police harassment and detentions of journalists, which takes up time, takes up resources, and is intimidatory. But also because of intimidation of sources, which makes it very difficult, but also potentially quite unethical to work there. That anyone that you speak to is then under threat of being sent to one of these camps. But using satellite imagery could help us to overcome both of those problems. So the technique that we used was to look at censorship in Baidu Maps, which is the Chinese version of Google Maps. What we found after a couple of months of initial studies and research was that the locations of many of the known camps were being censored in Baidu, that as you zoomed in on those locations, suddenly this light grey square would appear, and you would zoom in further and it would be gone. And it looked a little bit like the map was broken, but we realized that we could replicate this, that this blank square continued to appear. And in fact, we would see the same thing in other places where we knew that there were camps. And at that point, we realized that we had a technique that we could probably use to try and find the full network by mapping these censored locations and then going and looking at the same locations in uncensored satellite imagery in Google Earth, for example, and looking at what was there. And we managed to use this technique to uncover what we believe is very close to being the full network of camps across China. So the imagery that we used was mostly in Google Earth, and we were very lucky to be able to get high resolution imagery. This image shows a little bit of, it shows some of the things that we were able to see in this imagery. It's a camp that's in Shula, just south of Kashgar, which was the real Uyghur heartland in the southwest of Xinjiang. And this was a compound that was built, it was completed in late 2019. So we can see things like a very, very thick perimeter wall, 1.5 to 2 meters thick, and we can see guard towers. And those were key characteristics that helped us to confirm that this place was a camp. But we can also see more that shows us how this place works. We can see that there's a prison compound which is sealed off from from the wider buildings. We can see the police and administration buildings towards the entrance, and we can also see guard buildings and how they get access to the perimeter wall and guard towers. So just to give you a bit of an overview about how we worked and the sorts of tools that we used. This is actually the tool that Christo built us to help us to manage our database, first of masked tile locations, so that we could go through all of these, marking off as we did, whether we checked them or not, and whether there was anything of interest in that location. And then it also helped us to manage our locations of interest, that we could add markers into this database and then add information to them about our level of certainty that this place really was a camp, and then other notes about how we had seen this place develop, specific characteristics that we wanted to look more at, perhaps other imagery that we would need. But we also used a lot of free tools as well. So the main one that we used was actually Google Earth. We didn't use the browser version of that. There's actually what we found to be a much more useful version of Google Earth, which is the desktop version, which you can download for free from the Google Earth website. So this is a camp in Kashgar. It was originally built as 3 middle schools, although it's not clear that it was ever used as those. But we were very, very lucky pretty much across Xinjiang in that we had very high resolution imagery. And that allowed us to see these really quite small characteristics that meant that we could confirm whether a place was a camp or not. So for example, in this image, we can see a car park up in this road in the towards the top right. And that was, often we would see these car parks in camps. Just outside of the camp, makeshift ones that were along existing roads or perhaps on scrubland. And these makeshift car parks would be a key sign that a place was a camp. It's because where previously this compound was perhaps a school or a hospital and would have had the car parking on site, that became a security risk as soon as you converted a place like this to be a camp. And so the cars would be kicked out, and that was a key thing that we could look for. But Google Earth was also really helpful because it has so much historical imagery in it. And that allowed us to do a number of things. One of those was to see these camps under construction. So this is the same camp a few months later. And as we can see over here, we've got 4 new buildings under construction where there used to be a sports field. Now we can even see the cranes on the site. That's how good this resolution is. A few months later, and those buildings were completed. And again, this high resolution imagery is really helpful because we can see things like fencing on the sites. So this is barbed wire fencing that's going around each of these buildings. And the fact that you have buildings separated off from the rest of the compound was another key tell that a place was a camp. It's just a very, very unnatural thing to see in a typical school compound or hospital compound, for example. We can also see that this barbed wire is used to make pens that run adjacent to the buildings. And we believe that those were exercise yards for people who've been detained. We can also see things like this control point at the entrance to this part of the compound and a barrier across the road. And then in this later imagery, we can see buses arriving on the site, which may be to take detainees to forced labor placements elsewhere in the area. And what we can also see is in this courtyard down at the bottom, we can see groups of people all wearing dark red uniforms and lined up in columns in these sorts of military formations. And again, that was also a key characteristic of a camp and would indicate to us that this place was a camp. Now, it was great to have the historical imagery because it did allow us to see that progress of construction, but it was also useful because it gave us access to numerous different images of the same place, even when there wasn't any construction taking place. So atmospheric conditions can vary quite widely, and having multiple images available meant that we would be able to probably get a clear image of the site that we could analyze. Now, I should say that we were very lucky in Xinjiang that, again, like in many places, we had very up-to-date high resolution imagery, but in multiple places, especially around Kashgar, we might have imagery every month or even every few weeks at key times. And that was incredibly useful. It would mean that not only would we have varying quality of images, which would allow us to get very good ones, but it would also give us imagery that was taken from slightly different angles and would show us slightly different things. So as we can see in this imagery, the image has been taken at a slightly oblique angle, so we can see the facade of the building. And that means that we can easily count the number of floors and make a good estimate of how big that building was. And that was really important when it came to a later study that we did, where we wanted to work out how big the buildings were so that we could estimate the capacity of the camps. And we estimated that the capacity of the current camp program is at about 1,014,000 people, based on satellite imagery and based on my architectural knowledge and the Chinese prison building regulations that we found. Other tools in Google Earth that were really useful, the ability to measure and draw areas, and that allowed us to look at this camp in Korla and work out exactly how much it had grown between 2016 and 2019 when it was finished. The ability to add information into our maps in Google Earth was also really useful, to download the database from the tool that Christo had made and drop it into Google Earth as a CSV, and similarly to upload vector data, which would help us to interpret and analyze our information. So here, these brightly colored areas are the different counties of Xinjiang. Just quickly, the last tool I'll show you. As I said, we were very lucky in most areas of Xinjiang, but not everywhere. And so this, here in Kunyu in the south of Xinjiang, the most recent imagery that we had at high resolution was taken in 2013, and there was nothing there. It was before the detention program and the building that went with it had really started. And so for that, we needed to look at other tools. And the one that we turned to was the Sentinel Hub Playground, which brings together the European Space Agency's satellite imagery. With that, the imagery was much lower resolution. It's about 3 to 5 meters per pixel. That means that a car would be a single pixel in the image, and it would be quite difficult to see. But many of the detention centers and camps that we were looking at had very, very distinct shapes. And in this imagery, as blurred as it sometimes was, we would be able to see those shapes and identify that a given compound was potentially a camp and somewhere that we wanted to look at further. The other thing is that with this imagery, the satellites are taking images of the entire world apart from the poles every 2 or 3 days. And so we had really good up-to-date imagery of all of the places that we wanted to look at and monitor. And that allowed us to monitor the construction of these camps very closely, to put very precise dates on when they were started and exactly when they were finished. And to know that when the Chinese government was announcing that, you know what, guys, the camps have closed, which is exactly what they did in December 2019, that we were able to go and look at satellite imagery like this and be very, very skeptical of the claims, because we would be able to see that they were still building. I'll leave that there, but I'll add my contact details into the chat, and I'll also add the links to our articles and the explanations of how we did it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alison. Let's dive right into our conversation, and I would start with you, Alison. In addition to all this incredible data reporting and use of satellite imagery, geospatial analysis, your team also conducted in-depth interviews with former prisoners, people who had been imprisoned in these camps and others with deep knowledge of the camps. So can you talk to us about how that traditional shoe leather reporting combines and strengthens, improves, and even helps validate what you are seeing in your in those images and in your data reporting?
Yeah, sure. So I should have added that in. Yeah, I mean, I should say that we never ever relied only on satellite imagery for doing this work, and the corroboration work that we did was actually essential. It was essential even to help us understand the satellite imagery and to know what we were looking at and to help us interpret that properly. So we did interviews with dozens of former detainees who had stayed in these camps and had been released. In some cases, they were able to show us on Google Maps the camp that they had been held at, and that's how we located the camp. In other cases, they were able to talk us through the satellite imagery and sort of explain to us really what we were seeing and how the different parts of the camp were used. We also used a lot of government documents, such as tender documents, which often had addresses of the camps on, or employment adverts for guards who would go and work at the camp. And then we also had ground level photographs and media reports that also helped us to corroborate what we were looking at.
Thank you, Alison. And moving on to you, John, speaking about these trusting relationships, you talked a lot about, and I love the concept of bringing the community along when you do this work. And in your case, not only they were brought along, they were protagonists. They were collecting data, they were learning to use the drones. Did you run into any difficulties explaining what you wanted to do? And you mentioned the issues of privacy, or maybe not everybody wanted to be, on the map.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that.
Actually, we had a lot of challenges around that. Getting the community to adopt your project or to understand your project could be challenging initially. But what we did was we partnered with Makoko Dream, an organization they already have a trust relationship with. They're already working with. So they're already working with Makoko Dream. So we got the buy-in of that NGO and talked with the community. So they gave us a listening ear, and we're able to communicate the tech we want to do in a non-tech language to the community in a very basic form. So that is very key. It's usually a gap between technologists and communities. So then even teaching the students, the participants, we had to start from a very basic foundation. And that's why we brought the drones to the classroom. So they see it, they touch it, they feel it, they understand what they want to go through. And they understood that we are professionals and we are going to guide them through. So we held their hands through all of this, and they gained trust in us.
Thank you, John. I am going to go over now to Laura. I would like Laura to understand in your project. Thank you, John, you're back with us. In your project, you basically, through the use of data and images and this really detailed reporting, were able to dismantle an official narrative, which happened to be a false narrative, just like in the case of Xinjiang. Do you feel like this approach that you use help you insulate from discrediting and misinformation campaigns that were prevalent?
I think that the misinformation campaigns were still running forward despite the very clear evidence presented in the data. So it wasn't necessarily an insulated factor, because as soon as an alternative narrative shows up, there were definitely going to be, government supporters that would defend the official narrative under whichever false pretense they could imagine. But it was really nice to see how many different news media outlets shared the story and the results that we had and republished a lot of the maps and the main figures. And this was able to gain a lot of traction and to spread a lot further, or at least it was able to run the race alongside the misinformation and try to get ahead of that. So I think the good thing about that was that it spread widely and people were able to have access to that information to hopefully come up with their own conclusion.
I love when a smaller, gutsy digital outlet can set the media agenda for everybody else. A common thread among the three projects is the interdisciplinary work that was at the heart of the three investigations. And in some traditional newsrooms, there might still be some pushback when we talk about unconventional partnerships. In your case, with cartographers, with scientists, with the community, with an architect. So can we talk a little bit about, give advice to other journalists about conducting or establishing productive and effective partnerships across disciplines and how they can convince their editors when those editors are skeptical. Alison, do you want to, as an architect, partnering with a journalist, what was your experience?
Sure. I mean, BuzzFeed News were admirably open to this partnership with me and Christo. I was really impressed with their openness to that. I mean, I think that there's a couple of things which are actually needed for those sorts of collaborations to be able to take place. One is sort of, these different groups need to know each other, and individuals need to trust each other. So you need to know each other quite well for that to happen, and you need to have like a really good understanding of what each other's skills are and what you can both bring. Beyond that, I would say that we did a huge amount of feasibility work at the outset of this project, which was also necessary for us to get funding. So we worked very, very hard to show this is what we've seen, this is what we think we can find from it, this is how we can replicate it. These are the measures that we're going to take to make sure that we maintain our access to the information that we need. And this is why we're the people to do it. So we also went through this very, very rigorous evaluation program through our funders. And I'm sure that helped as well.
Laura, do you want to add your perspective on the work with
sure. I mean, Ambiental is all about those kinds of collaborations. That's part of the mission statement. So there was no trouble in terms of convincing there. But if anyone out there is trying to convince somebody to take up a collaboration or work with a particular, outside of the traditional journalism world expert, I would just point to some of those projects that you want to emulate or admire. If you want to look at Mapping Makoto and all of these projects and show them to your editor and say, look what people are doing out there. I think that would be a really good way to start planting the seed of doing something similar.
Another question that comes up when journalists start learning about geospatial analysis and satellite imagery is a question of cost and accessibility. But I am very heartened from hearing your presentations, because at many points you mentioned open source, or you mentioned that you were able to use certain tools that are available to everyone or through a partnership. So can we talk about approaches that journalists might use to be able to access these tools, these systems in an affordable way? John, do you want to go first?
Yeah. Okay. Yes. So it's very necessary. I think Code for Africa is one of the organizations that actually make sure we leverage on open source tools, because that is, you don't need to pay for those tools. So one of them we used was the Open Aerial Map. So it was open source. The Java OpenStreetMap, we used that tool as well. And also we use Flourish Data Studio to make the map slider to show the before and after. For Flourish, newsrooms can actually apply for a newsroom account, and the link is on the slide where I share, when you share the slide. So once they click that link, they can apply and get an account that will enable them enjoy all the premium access for free, being newsrooms. And also for journalists, there are other tools you can leverage on, like Outline VPN to protect yourself while you work, and any other thing. So it is very important for you to leverage on these free tools that are available, because you pay for a lot of things, and to reduce your costs on production, you need to use these tools. And also for Code for Africa, you can reach out to us. We support you. We do trainings on these tools and some of these things that can help you.
Thank you, John. Alison or Laura, would you like to share on this point?
I mean, I think I already really talked about the majority of the tools that we worked with. We used Google Earth, which is free to download, and the imagery within it is free to access. And the Sentinel Playground Hub from the European Space Agency. We also used QGIS a lot, which I think is on Laura's tip sheet. And a lot of the the tools that we use to, maintain and sort of analyze our database were sort of simple spreadsheets. And then, we used Data Wrapper for some of the sort of data visualization, which helped us with the analysis. In a few places, we didn't have access to satellite imagery. And so we approached Planet Labs, who have a media program, and very kindly gave us access to some of their high resolution up-to-date imagery for some of those locations.
So it's good to hear that some of these organizations are willing to partner with journalists and provide that kind of pro bono help when they advocate for themselves. That's really great to know. Laura, you had anything to add?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, QGIS, I think, is the main tool that I would want to bring up again. It's completely open source, and it's similar to ArcGIS in the sense that it is a desktop software for mapping and geospatial analysis. I actually really recommend this as a starting point to a lot of journalists, because not only can you do analysis in the tool, you can also create static maps and images that you can use in your stories. You can use it to work with satellite imagery. You can use it to work with vector data like points or polygons, and you can, do a lot of really cool stuff with QGIS. I also used RStudio to do some analysis with R, which is a programming language for statistical analysis. Very useful, and of course, completely free. And we used Mapbox GL, which Mapbox is free up to a point. So if you have more than a certain number of map views when you publish with Mapbox, you will start to incur costs, but it's a good thing to start practicing because it gives you a lot of really neat interactive mapping features.
And Laura, beyond tools, what are some, you teach this for a living, you teach students to use all these incredible techniques, but what are some of the framing questions that you ask your students to ask themselves before they approach a project in order to determine whether this kind of analysis is appropriate and needed in the project?
That's a really good point. Before you even begin putting data on a map, you have to wonder, do you want to map your data at all? Do you want to create an interactive map or a static map? Where is the data even coming from? All of the context around the data to know whether it's a reliable data set and all of that. So I always tell my students to ask themselves, is the reader going to be able to discover something new from mapping this data? Is the reader going to be able to explore something that's related to their personal experience, like looking for a particular geographic location near them? Or is the reader potentially going to be able to create their own conclusions by exploring your map and by exploring your data? So I always think, the purpose of visualization is to enable that portion of the brain that allows the reader to make a decision for themselves, so to speak, to try and explore the data for themselves. And when we're working with narratives, false narratives versus true narratives, all these things, I think that power is really key.
John, what was the response from authorities and officials after this community was mapped and was made visible?
Yes, we got the government interests, like the ministry that is in charge of waste collection reached out to us, and they wanted to add some points of interest. They tried to study the map to know which areas they would put their points of interest, so to like locations to collect wastes from the community, because one of the challenges that the community also face is solid waste. So they were trying to establish their presence, so we spoke with them and they got access to that. And so the government has been trying to plan for the community in terms of restructuring the entire community, their houses, the entire landscape. So this is a baseline data for the government to work with. And the data is open source and it's free, available for everyone to use.
Thank you, John. Alison, there are few topics that are more sensitive in China than Xinjiang. So what was the response of the government and others after this project came out?
I mean, the Chinese government denied everything that we claimed. They referred to our project as Groundless Lies. I mean, I think that we didn't really expect to get that sort of accountability from the Chinese government when we were doing this work. We were actually producing it. Of course, we're interested in sort of people within China sort of seeing this work and becoming better informed, but we were also producing it for an audience outside of China and policymakers outside of China who also lacked information about what was going on. You know, as I said, when we started, it was believed there were 1,200 camps, around 70 had been found. It was believed there were 1 million people detained. But again, there just wasn't a lot of solid evidence. And so providing the locations of what we believe is the full network was a big step forwards. And then, you know, the analysis that we've added to that about the forced labor in the camps and the extent of that, about the day-to-day life of the camps, about the likely capacity of the camp system, has all been used to inform sort of Western policy responses, from sanctions on key individuals to sanctions on China and cotton coming from Xinjiang.
Another thing I loved about your project, Alison, was that you turned those images and the information from the interviews into these very detailed renderings or drawings that literally went to the level of classrooms and bedrooms and what these camps really looked inside. Why do you feel like it was important to visualize the spaces inside the camps?
I mean, so little is known about what these places are like and what is going on inside them that we felt that was a really useful thing to do, to sort of really, I mean, of course we have like a lot of eyewitness testimony, but it was useful to add this visual element to really show like this is what these places are like inside. And the way that we did that work was actually working back and forth between the satellite imagery and a number of detainees who had all been held in that same camp. And we would sort of start to model, based on the satellite imagery, based on my architectural knowledge, what we thought the camp was like inside and what we thought was happening. And then we would take it to the detainees and say, like, what's happening in this space here? And, you know, the cell that you were held in, how many windows actually were in there? Because that was from that information, we were able to work out how many cells there were in the building. And we were able to work out just how overcrowded these places were, to work out that a cell that had been built probably to hold 3 or 4 people was in fact holding around 10. And yeah, and also to give this really clear picture of day-to-day life in one of the camps.
Thank you, Alison. The last question is about the future. It comes from a member of my team. When I was preparing, I asked Gustavo Faleiros, who has done a lot of mapping also in the Amazon region, what do you want to ask these amazing experts? And he wanted to ask about the next frontier. So now that geospatial analysis, satellite imagery is becoming a little bit more common in newsrooms, what are you looking at next? What is the next approach? What is the analysis that you really want to do next to tell these important stories?
I think there's a lot of really good work happening in the space of artificial intelligence and sort of computer vision to try and take those satellite images and glean even more information from them. I've seen some really cool projects already coming out along those lines. You know, something like detecting where something is that a human eye could not see.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, thank you very much, Laura. When we went to an event, Understanding the Risk, organized by the World Bank at Ivory Coast, we met with Facebook, and there was an awesome presentation around computer vision, AI, how you can use AI to actually map automatically some of these areas to convert the drone imagery into mosaic data that needs to be on the map. So because we did some of these things by crowdsourcing, you know, from the OpenStreet community. So we saw that computer AI is yet to get to that level because AI works through structured data, but the rooftops in most of these slum communities are clustered together. So it's difficult for AI of today to be able to map them automatically, seamlessly, you know. That would save a lot of work. So that was something we flagged and made them to understand that, okay, let us build AI for the African community where you have unstructured, you can have some unstructured buildings and rooftops. So another thing too, it's, yes, in our project, we say mapping is a continuous project. It doesn't stop, all right? And we prepare, we map these areas in the days of peace. So when we have emergencies or disasters, we can actually leverage on these maps we have built. So we continue updating the maps, and also map project gives birth to other projects. It's the foundation. They are the basis for most of these other projects that comes up. Like now, I told you that some organizations are reaching out to us to use this data for different things. Online MOOCs, they want to do other projects. They want to understand the community, to use your map data to move around the community. Navigation by fleet services, boat services, commercial boat services can come into Makoko and use this map data to navigate their paths using the boat terminals and all of these things. So we want people to use this data. It's free of charge. Thank you.
I love this reminder that even a powerful technology as machine learning, artificial intelligence, without that local context taken into consideration from the beginning, can be pretty ineffective. Alison?
I think I would build on John's point and just say that, like, once you've got a location database, you find that there's actually a lot that you can do with it, and bringing it together with other data sets and databases, and that can be used to further your investigations. So, I mean, one of the things that we've been doing in Xinjiang is to look at the database that we have of camp locations, and especially camps with factories, and then looking at the Chinese business directory and looking at companies that are located, that are actually registered in those locations. And from there, I mean, we know that there's huge amounts of forced labor that's going on in Xinjiang, but together with that camp data, the business registry data, we can start to look quite effectively at supply chains and how these camps and the forced labor is integrated into global supply chains too.
Thank you so much, Alison, and thank you, everyone. We have to start to wrap up this part of the panel, and we are going to now move over to the next part, which is the questions from the audience, and they are going to come in the chat. But thank you for the insight, for reminding us about the importance of always combining the reporting with these advanced technologies, for reminding us about taking into account the context and to ask ourselves the right questions before we decide what tools and technology to apply. And thank you for reminding us to bring the community along and to work on solutions with them. I am inspired, and I wish you the very best in your future projects. And now over to the audience with their important questions.